Adults aren't always around to explain things to young children. Even when they are, it's common for a child to see something new, and instead of asking a grown-up for clarification, he will instead invent his own explanation. Unfortunately, these explanations are based on the child's current level of understanding of the world and will sometimes result in the inadvertent burying of an emotional landmine that will explode sometime in the future after finding the truth. Here are 6 stupid things I believed as a child that keep me from sleeping at night. Small children have little to no concept of money. They also have only a rudimentary understanding of science. In an unfortunate moment that combined my burgeoning awakening of both science and economics, I once swallowed a penny by accident because I thought if I sucked on it hard enough, my spit would dissolve the brown paint on the coin and I'd be left with a shiny silver dime. Since it hasn't shown up in any recent x-rays, I assume the penny eventually escaped through the usual means. Cars are something children see as just giant boxes on wheels they get stuffed into when their parents go to the grocery store or grandma's house. As a child, all I ever saw was a blacktop road, trees zipping past the windows, and other vehicles on the highway. Eventually, I started to notice that cars going in our direction stayed in the right lane, while those coming from the other direction stayed in the left. It was also obvious those yellow lines in the center marked the space on either side where the cars were supposed to stay. What took me forever to figure out was what that narrow lane between the two lines was for, until it hit me that, duh, it had to be the motorcycle lane because they were the only kind of vehicle with tires skinny enough to fit. In horror, I realized the obvious disastrous flaw in this arrangement. What would happen if 2 motorcycles came toward each other from opposite directions? To my relief, I saw the broken yellow lines and understood that this was where the motorcycles would weave in and out to pass each other. While on the subject of automobiles, no passing signs on the highway were a constant worry because my mother would blatantly disregard their warning and drive right past those big triangles. I knew it had to be only a matter of time until she got arrested. Some of my stupidity was due to certain family members finding it hilarious to fill my head with the wrong ideas. My grandfather convinced me that if I pulled hard enough, I could neatly remove my teeth just like he could. While technically true, I wouldn't be able to put mine back in my head as easily as he could, since mine were baby teeth and his were a row of dentures. He really sold it too, telling me that there was a special way to push on your upper palate with your thumb to unlock it. The pilot light at the back of the oven at my grandparents' house would occasionally go out. My uncles would set the end of a rolled up newspaper on fire and use it to relight the appliance. To a 4-year-old with zero understanding of natural gas, all I saw was grown-ups having fun playing with the pretty blue flame in the back of the oven. Sometimes I'd get bored and mimic my uncles by rolling up a newspaper, reaching into the back of the oven, and catching the tip on fire before blowing it out like a birthday candle. I'd do this a few times before the novelty wore off and would go and find something else to play with. I used to play the oven game occasionally until the one time that the newspaper didn't go out. In fact, blowing on it only made things worse. So there I was, a 4-year-old holding what was essentially a flaming torch and starting to panic. Instead of doing something smart, like drenching it in the sink next to me, I simply did what anyone else would do with something they no longer wanted. I threw it in the garbage, which in this case was a large plastic container under the kitchen counter. It didn't take long before the bright flames started licking the underside of the countertop, so I simply did what anyone else would do if they were a 4-year-old child who knew he had royally screwed up. I quickly established an alibi by running upstairs to nap with my mother, who was still sleeping before the start of her next factory shift. This must have worked because I have no memory of being punished, and the only evidence I ever saw of my crime was a melted garbage can sitting out by the back door and scorch marks under the kitchen counter. Around age 6, I went through a phase where I was obsessed with hypnotism. After wasting a couple dollars on a phony hypnosis disc from a comic book ad and being disappointed to learn it was nothing more than a cheap POG-like piece of cardboard featuring a spinning effect in lenticular plastic, I knew the real method was the tried and true waving a piece of jewelry in front of the victim's face. Having seen this performed on any number of cartoons and bad daytime television, I was an expert. Determined to help, my 2 uncles volunteered my aunt as a willing subject. Letting me borrow one of her cheap necklaces with a locket, I swung it rhythmically in front of her face, telling her over and over again how sleepy she was feeling. To my delight, she fell instantly into a trance and was completely in my power. Again, as an expert hypnotist with years of television watching experience, I knew the first thing you did with your victim was, of course, turn them into an animal. "You are a chicken," I commanded. "Bark, bark!" "You are a cat." "Meow, meow." "You are a dog." Obediently, my aunt got down on all fours and started barking. Pleased with myself, I envisioned spending any number of hours giving commands to my mesmerized subject, but my uncles had other plans. They told me I needed to put her necklace away before it got lost, which I did. Upon returning, however, my aunt was nowhere to be found. Acting worried, my uncles told me she must have run away, still thinking she was a dog. Then they started filling my head with all sorts of horror stories about how my poor aunt was probably lost in the woods or was going to be hit by a car and killed, and it was all my fault, and just how mad my mom, and worse, my grandma were going to be. I was much more terrified of my grandma. My aunt was obviously in on the joke and was probably hiding in a closet, but since this took place over 40 years ago, I can't remember how everything was resolved. The terror and guilt I felt knowing that I'd killed my aunt, however, stayed with me a long time. The list of stupid things I believed as a child, and some of the trouble it got me into later, is far from complete, especially since there's a whole wide world of misconceptions about sexuality and human biology to explore. Please look forward to those in a future video.